This talk is about Neelam's journey, as you can see on screen, scaling Instacart to being quite large, the kind of scale that many of us in the room aspire to be. Neelam has been on that journey, and I had a few questions I was going to ask, and then would love to open it up to anyone in the audience who wants to ask Neelam a question about Instacart, delivery, grocery, acquiring 45,000 different stores to work with Instacart, over 10,000 employees, $1.5 billion in total revenue. Quite an amazing story. And I wanted to start, Neelam, and huge thanks for joining us, asking about your personal journey. So you started at Instacart in 2013 as head of business development of strategy. You then became an SVP. You then became chief business officer and president. How did you do that, and what tips would you share with everyone in the room who wants to grow with their brand, grow their brand, and do the type of thing that you achieved with Instacart?
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for having me here. It's really exciting to be here. Jeremy and I go way back. We were classmates, and I reached out to him to have a coffee, and here I am. He did me one better. So thank you, Jeremy, for having me. I am incredibly fortunate. I joined Instacart as employee 12. We were headquartered in a house. I joined because I'd spent my life in the grocery sector and the CPG sector. I was introduced to Instacart's founder and CEO by a classmate of Jeremy and mine. And I was working in management consulting and decided, my wife and I had just had our first child, a daughter who's now almost 9. And I was having, I guess, a quarter life crisis, hopefully a quarter life crisis based on the age at the time. And I said, okay, I want to try something completely different than professional services. So I took a leap and joined this startup in a house as the first business employee. And my plan, was I will stay for a year. So I joined as an individual contributor. There was no real mandate. It was one of those join, be helpful, and try to figure it out. And reflecting after an 8.5-year journey, each step in that trajectory that you mentioned followed that arc. Every year, I kind of look myself in the mirror, and I encourage today our portfolio companies to do this from the perspective as an investor. Management teams need to look themselves in the mirror and say, am I the right person to climb the next hill for the next year of this company? Because we're all shareholders in most of these companies. You want to make sure that you are going to be the right person for that job. So I basically live by this credo of, like, the next year was not promised to me. If I was the right person for the next year, I'd do it and I'd run against it. And the way I kept progressing was really by taking on a bunch of stuff that no one else wanted to get done. And that was if I have a career hack, I didn't realize that was the hack, but that was it. Do a bunch of stuff that no one else wanted to do, whether it was within your purview or not. So I'll give you some examples. In 2015, Instacart, this has been written about by others and blogged about by others, but we were losing a lot of money. We were losing $16 every delivery out the door. We were a pioneer in this, kind of delivering stuff to people before a lot of the, local commerce companies now. But as a pioneer, we were the first to have to figure a lot of things out, and we were burning an inordinate amount of money. The private capital markets suddenly seized up. I'll never forget walking out of a board meeting where our lead investor basically indicated the taps were completely turned off. We looked at a group of 3 of us, looked ourselves in the mirror and said, okay, we got to get to work. I put up my hand. I was running revenue at the time as our SVP of business, and no one else had experience taking vast amounts of the cost base out. I was a consultant who focused a lot on cost takeouts. Not the job I was doing at Instagram. I'm like, I'll do it. And we ended up, fortunately for the company, unfortunately at the moment in time, taking out 35% off of our OpEx base, resizing our unit economics, where within an 8-month period we went from losing $16 a delivery to profitable per delivery, raised a new round of capital, and then kind of never looked back. That's an example of just take on stuff that no one else wants to touch, and that was one approach. The second approach that I flagged was through the journey. I always had self-doubt. So as president, I ran basically everything but engineering and product. And the reason I didn't run engineering and product, candidly, was because I'm non-technical, and even at times when I could have done it, I'm like, no. And in hindsight, you figure it out, right? I didn't know customer support, I didn't know operations, I didn't know HR, but you hire great people, and you move stuff out of their way and leave them alone. That's, so when you're feeling those moments of self-doubt as you're projecting through your career, lean forward wherever you can, because you might surprise yourself.
Thank you so much. And we've got a range of different fast-growing businesses in the audience at different stages. What were the big forks for you in Instacart's brand journey, and how did you make those choices as those forks became clear to you?
It's so interesting. One of the things I'm vocally self-critical on regarding the Instacart journey was I felt we didn't develop a brand for 7 years. And because 7 of the 8.5 that I was there, and because we were founded in the Valley in a moment in time, we came out of Y Combinator, and we were early Y Combinator, and the meme was, you don't invest in brand. This is no longer true, but the meme really was, you don't invest in building a brand, you build a great product and the brand follows. And we kind of over-rotated to that, so we spent no money on marketing, we were not purposeful on anything related to brand. And there was a moment when we realized, and speaking of a fork in the road, there was a moment we realized that we had started to stand for things in consumers' minds that we lost control of. And we then started to try to regain the narrative with our consumers and our personal shoppers. These are the people who pick and deliver groceries. And it became an extraordinarily expensive proposition to retrain people. Luckily, at that time, we found religion on needing to own this, so we were willing to make the investments. But the learning for me is, one, you need to stand for something from a brand perspective and kind of have a point of view of what you want to stand for early, because it's so easy to get out of your control. And the channels for your brand to get out of your control, you may not even be obvious to you. So for us, I think a lot of it happened because of PR that we didn't control. A lot of it happened because we found ourselves in the middle of a tug of war in the United States on legislative issues about whether these folks who are doing the job are employees or contractors. And we ended up being a poster child for it. And we were the poster child because we didn't own our own brand. So until we started talking to people proactively about the impacts we were having to communities, the impact we were having to folks who otherwise weren't able to earn a meaningful wage, other people were telling our story for us, and that was not a good story.
And what did you do to take control of that brand back at those moments when you realized that was happening and also stuff was happening to you, not because of you?
I think job one was figuring out what the baseline was. So we ended up having to pull ourselves out of everything else, like building products, selling, we're signing on retailers, selling CPG advertisers. We had to pull ourselves as a most leadership team back to say, okay, what are customers saying about us, and what are our shoppers saying about us, and for us, what are regulators saying about us? So that was step one. Then we needed to, with that baseline, we needed to come to grips with the fact that it was a lot worse than we thought across all of those dimensions. And that it seems easy, but there was a lot of defensiveness, especially because many of us were there through that whole journey, and frankly, it was our fault we were where we were. So once we then acknowledged the truth, we got to work, and it got easy once we acknowledged the truth, because it's honestly an investment decision and time decision. So you just put money against telling your story, hire great people, and then let time be your friend. Luckily, when the flip side of the fact that we did it late, when we started doing it, we had a business that economically worked, where we were able to spend meaningful amounts of dollars across policy teams, marketing teams, performance marketing teams, comms teams that didn't exist before we went on this journey. Then we just went and hired the best to go kind of right the ship. So.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And we're a bit biased here at Attest in that we like to sort of fuel discovery of new ideas and understanding what's going on in your market, your landscape, your competitor group. And one of our board members had a great quote yesterday: great understanding of your customers is not a luxury, it's a necessity. What was your method for doing that over those 8.5 years as your competitive set changed, as how your industry was perceived and how that evolved? How did you stay abreast of what demand wanted from you and then what you should do about it?
Yeah, I think I would say 3 things. I think culturally, the company always had a test and learn mindset, which I took for granted. I thought everyone operated this way until I started, having exposure to other companies. We never did anything without, doing
but without testing it first. And that I think comes from being a product-driven company. And we were very purposeful in terms of designing of our tests, making sure there's sufficient, sample size, and nothing got past the post in terms of like getting launched to general population without there being a test. It was like a gate that none of our product managers would even think of crossing. So that was just like culturally something. So it's the first principle. The second principle is our bar on what to test was very low. So like everyone can have a test and learn model, but you can't have a funnel that constrains the number of tests that are being run. So anyone at Instacart who, in product engineering and a few other teams could run whatever test they want, marketing. And that was a really, it ends up having a multiplicative factor because each test gives you learnings that then someone else can take on and then build off of versus like you're waiting in kind of sequential fashion. You can run a lot of stuff in parallel. And then the third thing that I honestly, I still don't know how I feel about it. You asked about competitive intelligence. We were late relative to a lot of our peers in building out a competitive intelligence function. It's ended up adding a ton of value, but I still can't point to specifically, how it's translated into actions. But I know the team adds a lot of value, and that's one that I've seen a lot of our peers and competitors use, frankly, to compete against us, and then finally we were like, okay, we need one of these to figure out how they're pricing and what moves they're making on M&A, et cetera. So we ended up building that out. So
yeah, sometimes those things are just about dissolving doubt and adding confidence than about finding the alchemy to do something new.
I think that's exactly right. I think it helps quell the questions on like, you said dissolving doubt. I think that's the best way to put it, but it just, otherwise as a leader, you have a lot of, it fits in the unknown bucket. And you're like, oh no, there's going to be a bad surprise behind this door. So you might as well just try to like open the door and see if there actually are surprises there or not.
Just shifted across one notch. I had one more question, but it's a bit silly. So we're going to go to Slido. What's the single biggest thing you learned about leading a brand during your time at Instacart?
Yeah, I think it goes back to controlling your own narrative. And to control your own narrative, which means like defining your own brand, you need to be honest with yourself around where your brand is. And because brands are often personifications of a lot of different decisions that accrue over time, I find even in companies I work with now from a D1 perspective, you start with a bias about wanting to see your brand the way you see it, but that doesn't matter. The way you see your brand doesn't matter. It's the way your customers or frankly your competitors see your brand.
Yeah, we often talk about the story of Peloton and their campaign they ran that had such a big backlash. If only they'd walked outside their own office and asked 10 people on the street, what do you think about this campaign? They would never have launched it. It was appalling. The fact that people don't do that is ridiculous. We have time for a couple more questions from Slido if anyone wants to put anything in there. But last one from me. The whole grocery delivery space has evolved a lot in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
Far more competition, a lot more VC money. I saw a tweet last week which said something like, hey, Silicon Valley VCs, thanks for the $250 and counting free groceries you gave me in the last 2 weeks. Cheers. Yeah. How did we get here? What's next on the horizon for the industry as far as you can say?
Yeah.
And what are you up to now?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm very proud to say when I joined Instacart, and this by no means is hubris, I just like find it funny that it worked out this way, so please take it with that spirit. When I was talking through the decision with my wife, I'm just like, well, look, if this works, like, we often with big decisions, you kind of want to say, okay, if this works, like how much can it work, right? So, okay, I was talking to my wife and I said, okay, well, I want to do this because if this works, our daughter, Sita, will never have to shop for groceries the way we did. And we laughed. We truly laughed. Flash forward 8 or 9 years, I don't know when my daughter went to a grocery store. My son sure hasn't. He's 5 years old. He definitely has never been to a grocery store, despite mom and dad working in grocery stores through high school. My daughter has maybe been to one 3 times. They don't know any other way of getting their groceries other than Instacart. So I am proud to have been, tip of spear of like what I think was a change that was going to happen anyway. But frankly, like what we are seeing now broadly is probably irrational. I think it's a little bit, capital follows success, and I think there were a number of successes on the getting stuff from place to place model, starting with Amazon, Instacart, DoorDash. You go down the list. There were a few real winners, and then capital just started pouring in. My perspective is a lot of the we got off subsidization in 2015 during this like minus $16 per delivery to not losing money. I am not a believer that you can subsidize your way to scale. Call me old-fashioned, but more power to anyone who is trying. So,
it'd be fun to see if it works for them.
Yeah.
I think we've got time for one more question. I'm going to choose the bottom one, just completely subjectively. You spoke about testing. How do you go about testing big and small? You mentioned about lowering the threshold to what you do test. I love that. Cast a wide net, experiment wide.
Yeah.
Across different departments, what were the biggest pitfalls and what were the things that you discovered in that testing that you didn't do but was fascinating?
Yeah. I think the two things about testing as a concept that often hold companies back on both doing it as well as the yield they get out of it. First is they don't invest upfront in processes and systems to enable testing. And depending on whatever product you're working on, good testing requires a lot of infrastructure and data infrastructure so that you're getting signals back to figure out if what you're testing is working or not. But the problem with that is it takes time to go build that, instrument your product so that it can fire the signals and then count the signals and then analyze the signals and do something with it. And I find a lot of companies try to skip those first few steps and just start testing stuff. And then they quickly say this testing thing, I'm not really learning anything, but you weren't learning because you weren't set up to learn. It's almost like taking my 9-year-old, putting a college textbook in front of her and telling her to read it. She's not set up to read what's in that college textbook. So that's mistake number one. Pitfall number two, slightly more subtle and not as fatal but still dramatically reduces yield comes back to the culture point I made earlier. For testing to get the most yield out of it, you need to be able to quickly share learnings, and it can't just be within a product pod or within a function or within a department or what have you. It's got to be company-wide. So, and everyone needs to feel like they should understand each other's tests and results, not at the detail level, but okay, what were we trying to prove? What did they find? So that they are internalizing that as they're going about designing their own tests or as they're going about building their, whatever it is they're doing. This was the hardest thing to do as, the company's now 3,700 people. As we grew, it became harder and harder to cross-pollinate learnings. The company's tried to build a lot of systems to try to make that happen, be it, meetings, repositories, et cetera. But really the silver bullet is people being in an office together talking about what they're learning. And, COVID obviously was a huge detriment to that, so.
Neelam, thank you so much for your time. And thanks everyone for your questions. And we're going to move on to the next session.
Thank you so much.